Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I have 5 Reddit stories for you. All credit goes to the original posters. I will link the stories in the description. I still don't know what it was. I have no explanations for what I'm about to write below, but if any of you lived something similar, don't hesitate to tell me how you dealt with it. So I've lived in this house for less than 2 years. We've been in there with my mom and my stepfather. He was a really kind man who always treated me like his own daughter. He knew me since I was 3. I insist on this because it's one of the reasons I knew something was wrong. We moved in this house, but from the beginning it never really felt like home. There was this feeling like there was someone watching you all the time, breathing in your neck. It didn't take long for me to see it. He was sitting on the windowsill, just in front of my bed. During more than a year, I saw it every night. I first thought it was the shadow of a moon, as I had another window in my room. But I changed my mind, then I covered the 2 windows, and it was still there. I started not only to see it, but hear it. It was always behind me when I was home. I was so desperate at one point that I shouted at it, asking him what it wanted from me. As the only answer, it tilted its head from side to the other. Our neighbor who lived in our house when she was a little girl once came by to ask us to take care of her cat when she was gone during her holidays. They started talking with my mom. I was not there. And when my mom told her I was feeling uncomfortable and seeing things, our neighbor froze and just said, "Oh, she saw it too, huh? Great." I don't know if I must say it or he. It was not an object, but neither a human. Some shadow with a kind of human body and a really old hat. The night before we moved out, my mom slept on the couch in the living room underneath my room. She heard like someone was dancing, jumping of joy in my room. There was nothing left in it. This night I slept in another room because all my furnitures were ready in our new apartment. My stepfather changed the second we moved in this freaking house. He was becoming violent, mean to me and my mom. I talked to him about how he was in this house years later, and he assured me he didn't remember anything I was saying. As we noticed that men were particularly getting aggressive around the house. Years after we moved out, I decided to take a test. One of my best friends and I were walking in our village, and I decided to stop by my old house. I pretended to have hurt my feet so we could rest on a wall in front of the house. He didn't know about it, and after a few minutes, he told me we have to leave immediately. My best friend, who's the most chill and non-aggressive person in this world, looked me right in my eyes and told me, "We have to leave, otherwise I'll hurt you." And just then we left. He was feeling better again. 10 years later, I'm still looking for answers. Who or what was it? My wife is a mute, and now I know the reason why. I was 12 years old that day. It had been raining constantly about a week straight in our area, but seeing as both our parents were either working or drunk, my best friend Luke and I were forced to trudge home in the downpour. I pulled my cheap, dirty yellow raincoat tighter about myself as we turned off the main road into the wooded area where both our families lived. "Batman would totally kick Superman's ass," Luke said, pushing his wet blonde hair out of his eyes. "He has all kinds of gadgets and is the best fighter in all of the comics." I really don't think it would be a competition. I couldn't help but scoff. "You can't be serious. Superman may look human, but he's an alien man. He would have flattened Batman like a pancake if he wanted to. Batman would stand no chance at all, whether he's the best fighter or not." That's the thing though, Superman doesn't kill, right? Especially not humans, so Batman would have the advantage. And even then, he would still never be able to kill Superman. There were voices. Luke and I slowed to a stop, noticing 3 older boys up ahead. They were standing in a circle around something, maybe an animal, and were yelling at and taunting it. The biggest of them, who I recognized from his red hair as Tommy Vance, was holding a large stick. I saw him kick at whatever was down on the ground in front of the boys. "Let's just keep walking. Maybe he won't notice us," Luke said quietly, barely moving in his mouth, but I shook my head. "That could be my dog he's messing with, or yours. I'm getting a closer look." I began walking directly towards Tommy and his crew. Luke, though hesitant, followed behind me. As we got closer, I could make out what Tommy was saying. "Shove that stick right up in there. How would you like that, huh?" There was a girl sitting on the ground, completely naked, her arms wrapped around her knees, which were up to her chest. She had long, wet hair that was black as night and large, otherworldly green eyes. Despite her position, I did not see fear in those eyes. I didn't even see anger. If anything, she looked almost disappointed. One of Tommy's lackeys noticed me and nudged me on the arm. "Look, it's our two best friends, Tommy." Tommy turned, his all too familiar sneer forming on his face when he saw us. "Oh, Daniel and Luke, what great timing. I know the two of you will never fuck a girl, so maybe I'll let you watch us." "Leave her alone, Tommy." My fists were clenched. Tommy looked astounded that I had spoken back to him. "What was that, you little shit?" "You heard me. Let her go. She's probably cold and just wants to go home, like the rest of us." Tommy spat on the ground. "Why don't you make me?" I turned, beginning to walk away, when Tommy turned his attention back to the girl. I made my move. I struck him in the back of the head, and he yelled, staggering forward. His friend came at me, hitting me in the stomach, while Luke threw a slug at his other friend. I kneed my attacker in the balls, while Tommy came at me, hitting me twice in the face. I fell to the ground and he kicked me in the stomach. I coughed as Luke ran forward, trying to tackle Tommy, who simply pushed him aside and kicked him as well. Luke kicked at Tommy's ankle, which earned him a stomp to the face. I tackled Tommy from behind, taking him to the ground, but then his friend yanked me off of him and threw me in the direction of the girl. Bleeding, I stood up, putting myself between her and the boys. Tommy looked angry, but he seemed to have had enough. Luke and I had never fought back before. "You're lucky my old man's expecting me home. I'm going to kick both of your asses during lunch tomorrow." He and his crew walked off. Luke was wiping blood off his face, but I turned to the girl. "Are you okay?" She only stared back at me with those intense green eyes. "Don't worry, I'm not like Tommy. He's an asshole. Where are your clothes? Where do you live?" She didn't look like she understood a single word I was saying. I reached out a hand towards her. "Come on, you can come and have dinner at my house. My parents can call yours." The girl stared at my hand for a moment, and then she reached her own up. I can't exactly describe the sensation I felt when she touched me, but it was seemingly warm and yet very cold at the same time. It lasted for only an instant, and then she was standing, her eyes bearing into mine. Luke was turning red, and it wasn't from the blood. I've never seen a girl naked before. "Oh, that's right." I quickly wiped off my raincoat and wrapped it around her. "Come on." She took my hand, and then the three of us continued through the woods. By the time we made it home, the rain had stopped. The girl ate dinner with my family, but didn't speak a word the entire time. She simply looked between us, observing our movements and conversations. As soon as she finished her food, she stood, walked over to the door, and left without giving any of us another glance. I ran up to the open door, staring out after her. She glanced back at me, then vanished into the darkness. I began to see her repeatedly out in the woods, and over time began to form a friendship with her. Luke snuck some of his sister's clothing out for her, and the three of us would sit in the grass, eating sweets and enjoying life. I brought my textbooks from school and flashcards, trying my best to teach our new friend, who I called Michelle, about any and everything. Though she still never spoke, there was understanding in those eyes. I would bring her food from my own house, but on the days I couldn't find her, I often wondered what she ate. I also noticed she had a habit of staring up at the sky, her eyes seemingly searching for something that was not there. This habit would increase tenfold whenever it rained. When I was 16, I asked Michelle if she wanted to come to the school dance with me. She nodded clearly, excitedly to finally go out with me to a more public place. I bought her a dress and took her to the dance with me in my truck. She was so enamored with the decorations, the lights, and the other students, I couldn't help but smile all night. 3 years later, I married that beautiful, quiet girl. I learned sign language and taught it to Michelle. I took her hunting with me, though she would never touch a gun, and we spent many nights just laying in the grass, like we used to as kids, staring up at the stars in the sky. During these moments in particular, Michelle would sometimes look at me as though she wanted to say something. I would sign to her, ask her what was up, and she would simply lay back down and close her eyes. I had asked her multiple times about where she had come from, and she would never answer me. She would, however, look up at the sky. Our firstborn was a boy who we named Simon. A couple of years later, our little girl Sarah was born. The two of them were like gifts sent from heaven to Michelle. They grew up speaking like any other kids would, but seemed to understand their mother without even needing to learn sign language. They would know if she wanted them to do their homework or take out the garbage or feed the dog. Without a single word or hand movements, it was truly remarkable, but I chalked it up to the connection a mother has with her kids, and that even a father cannot understand. I caught my daughter Sarah one night as she opened her bedroom window and leaned out of it, her green eyes fixated on the moon. I rushed into the room and grabbed her, pulling her away and falling to the floor. "Jesus, honey, what are you doing? You could have fallen." "Don't you hear, Daddy?" she asked, looking into my face. I strained my ears, listening to the sounds of nature through the window. "Hear what, sweetheart?" It's looking for us." "What's looking for you, Sarah?" Sarah stared into my eyes, then without surprising strength, burst out of my arms and rushed over to the window again. "Listen, Daddy, don't you hear it? It sounds so beautiful." "There's nothing out there, honey." "I hear it too." Simon was in his pajamas, standing in the doorway. "I would try to explain it to you, but you would never get it." And with that, he turned back and went back to his room, closing the door behind him. After nailing Sarah's window closed, I told Michelle about what the kids had said to me. She proceeded to stay up all night, standing out on the front porch staring up at the sky. She didn't move until the sun came up and it was time to take the kids to school. A couple of months later, Luke hosted a barbecue at his place. My family was invited as well as his brother Josh was. We got a kiddie pool for the kids, and I brought plenty of whiskey for us adults to enjoy ourselves. Luke, already drunk off his ass, challenged me to an arm wrestle. I obligated and he beat me, much to his wife and son's enjoyment. Seeing as we were all outside, I decided to go and take a piss in the backyard. I was humming a song as I headed to the back when something caught my eye. It was my son, Simon. He was standing in the middle of the yard, his chest thrust outward, his entire body spasming as he stared up at the sky. His eyes were completely white, and there seemed to be a sort of greenish aura around him, similar to a toy or paint that glows in the dark. I froze up, entirely unsure of what I was witnessing or what I should do. Was he having a seizure? Could he have been bitten by a snake or a rabid raccoon? Before I could make a move, a figure darted forward, moving faster than a deer. It was Michelle. She took Simon to the ground, seemingly breaking him from his trance. She looked into his face, her own full of terror, and she grimaced. Son, are you okay?" I called out, and he glanced at me. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I didn't mean to. It reached out to me, and I... Without a single trace of thunder or lightning, it began to rain. I looked up at the sky, which had quite suddenly been overrun by gray clouds. The rain was coming down hard. I felt a terrible sense of dread as I stood there. Something was moving behind the clouds. Only Luke would have a barbecue on the day it rains this week. Joshua came up to me and patted me on the back. "What are y'all doing back here? Let's get back to the front. We're going to take all the meat in. Oh, and Simon, I have your book. Didn't want it to get wet." He began approaching my wife and son, and that was when it struck. A large humanoid thing swooped down from the sky, seizing Joshua and soaring upwards all in one motion. I could hear Luke and the women screaming. The thing, which I could barely see due to the rain, was huge. It was surely over 7 feet tall, completely covered in black skin that seemed to be oozing slime. I watched as it ripped Joshua in two, sending a waterfall of blood and innards down onto his family below. Michelle and Simon were up and running now, headed for the front of the house. I followed behind them as Luke's wife Martha picked up Sarah, who was staring up in wonder. All of us were making a dash for the front door, but Martha was the next target. The thing rammed into her back, causing her to fall forward and drop Sarah. "No!" Luke screamed, but the thing had grabbed his wife and shot back up into the air. I ushered my own family and Luke's kids and nephew into the house before grabbing onto him. "Come on!" "No, it took my wife. God damn it, it took my wife." I yanked him as hard as I could, and the two of us stumbled into the house. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. I turned around looking at Simon and Sarah, who were huddled around their mother. Luke's kids were crying, as was Joshua's wife. Luke had disappeared into another room. Michelle, honey, do you know what that is?" I signed to her, but her eyes already told me the answer. Luke reappeared, his shotgun in hand. "Luke, what are you doing? You're gonna get yourself..." Martha was thrown violently through the window, striking me in the back. I fell to the floor, the wind knocked out of me, and stared into what used to be her face. Whatever the fuck that thing was, it was already ravaged her. Blood was spreading in a pool on the floor. "You motherfucker!" Luke aimed his gun at the window, but in an instant the thing had him by his neck and pinned to the wall. Now I could see it clearly. It had a bald head that protruded at the top, with a face that had several pure black eyes, no nose, and a mouth that had rows of sharp black teeth. Not unlike a shark's, it had long, thick black tail, wreathed around like a snake, and a massive chest and arms, its skin slimy and black, seemingly dancing all about its body in constant motion. Luke tried to maneuver the shotgun, but the thing took his arm off and threw it and the gun on the other side. The arm landed on the floor, causing the finger to pull the trigger, sending a single bullet right at my family. The gunshot pierced Michelle's arm, and she grabbed at it, leaning forward. Instinctively, I made my way towards her as the creature crushed Luke's head swiftly between its hands like a grape. I had barely made it over to my family when it grabbed me next and slammed me hard into the wall. I will never again feel the absolute horror that pulsed through me as I stared into those soulless black eyes. "No," Michelle hissed. Her voice boomed louder than thunder, and the entire house shook. She was pointing a finger at the creature holding me, and it turned its head to look at her. They considered each other for a moment, and then it released me. I slid down to the floor as it vanished into thin air. I glanced at my wife, who was looking sadly at me. Her skin began to change, rippling into black oozing flesh. Her hair shrunk up into her head, and her eyes turned from green to black. Before she had completely changed, however, she too vanished right before my eyes. "Michelle! Michelle!" I ran outside, staring up into the sky. I ran all around the house looking for my wife, searching the heavens, but she was gone. The rain had stopped. That was a few years ago. Life has gone on. Simon is in middle school now, and he and Sarah have adapted to life as much as they can without their mother. We have survived. I still look after Luke's kids as well, making sure they have everything that they need, and though I know deep down it's not my fault, I still feel immense guilt that they were growing up without their parents. The tears have stopped, but the sadness will always remain. It is strange though, sometimes when it rains, I feel as though she is with me. I can feel her presence, as though she's letting me know that she's okay. The kids will sit out in the yard, getting drenched, as they stare up in the sky, and I watch them smile. I've been walking for hours. I don't normally wake up in the middle of the night, but ever so often I get up to use the bathroom, get a snack, or because I hear a noise. My house has a staircase running from mine and my parents' room to the living room. The staircase isn't that long, and you can see the bottom from the top very clearly. Maybe if I wasn't so drowsy, I would have noticed the pitch black void in the place of my living room before I started climbing down. I woke up around 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, when something happens in the real world and you can hear it. in your dream, I heard a phone ringing in the distance, instantly bringing me to a state of lucid dreaming. Shortly after I entered lucidity, I woke up from a feeling of urgency and paranoia. I then realized that was wrong. The ring didn't match my phone, my mother's phone, my father's, not even any of the 2 landline phones we had in the kitchen. I assumed maybe we had gotten a new phone, trying to ground myself into reality until I realized the phone had been ringing for over 5 minutes. I sat up slowly, still feeling the exhaustion of the day before. I felt my heart beating fast, but I still couldn't wake myself up. I slumped out of bed and managed to stand up. The state of my body instantly reminded me of a video game I played a while back. I think it was called Manual Samuel. In the game, you had to control Samuel's limbs, make him walk, talk, and you had to control his breathing too. As I forced myself to my bedroom door, still hearing that annoying ringing, I found it hard to control my body. A lot like the game I just mentioned. I made it to the door and stepped out of the room. I noticed that I didn't hear my dad snoring. My dog wasn't sitting in the front of my door. I flipped the light switch, preparing for the blinding surge of light, but there was nothing. I checked the lamps. The light bulbs were all shattered. It really should have been more shocking to me, but I was still fighting off the feeling of fatigue and drowsiness. I then made the worst mistake of my life. I started walking down the stairs. The second I started walking, I was zapped awake. The phone stopped ringing and everything fell deathly silent. I immediately looked back and saw nothing. I didn't see the entrance to my room. I didn't see any of my lamps. It was just more stairs. Even the wallpaper was different, no longer the aged white wallpaper. Now it was deep maroon with black stripes. The carpeted stairs were replaced with hardwood. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I pointed it towards the void in front of and behind me. The beam disappeared, just a few feet into the void. I nearly dropped my phone when I got another idea. Hey Google, what is my current location? Somehow I still had some service. Once Google Maps loaded, I saw it. It was my house, my street. I didn't move. I'm still in my house. I've been walking for hours now, or at least what felt like hours. I still somehow have service. I've tried calling the cops, my father, my mother, anyone, and everyone in my contacts. Every call has been met with a gurgled static. It almost sounds like talking like when you're in school cafeteria or a heavily populated party. It sounds like talking, but you can never get a word out of it. Whenever I stop walking, I hear something almost like an inaudible whispering. Please, if anyone knows how to get out of this, you have to tell me. I have my own theory. I think time has stopped around me. I forgot to mention that my battery hasn't gone down. My clock hasn't changed. Wherever I am, I'm going to keep walking. I'm afraid of what will happen if I stop for too long. Next story is We Guard This House. Tucked away on a random dirt road out in the country is a house that my family has been guarding for generations. No one seemed to know why we had to guard this house, or why it's only during the evening hours. All we know is that as long as everything seems fine, you can leave by 9. Typically, you only have to stay for a few hours, and with how big our extended family is, you only have to take a shift once every couple months. Nobody really considered it guarding. It just sounds better than sitting outside a random house for 4 hours for no reason. My friends found out about my odd job a couple of months ago, and since then have been begging me to bring them over to see it. I finally relented, and we made plans for them to come next time. It was my turn to guard. I did a lap around the house before settling down on a log, waiting for my friends to show up. If they listened to what I said, then they were probably in the process of walking around the cornfield that was behind the house. They parked on a side road opposite the cornfield, so there was no way my family would know I was bringing them out here. It wasn't quite dark yet when my friends got there, but by the time we made our way around the house, my friends stopped at every window to try to see inside. It's dark. It's a pretty boring house, Chris says. I've been telling you guys there's nothing special about it. It's just an old house. An old house where almost all the original paint is gone. Why don't we go inside and see? Sean asks. I can't be the only one who wants to know what's inside. True, Chris says. Maybe we can figure out why your family has been keeping an eye on it for so long. They both turn to look at me. I think about it for a moment. I have to admit, I am curious about what's inside too. Okay, but I don't know if it's safe to go inside, so we have to be careful. You guys aren't even supposed to be here, and I don't need to get in more trouble by having one of you fall through the floor. We pull out our flashlights and watch as Sean tests the steps leading up to the small porch. Chris follows him up, but the porch isn't big enough to fit all of us, so I stand on the stairs behind them. Sean reaches out and raps on the door. As soon as he makes contact with the door, light starts shining through the curtains. What the fuck? Does someone live here? Chris turns to look at me. I start to respond when the front door starts to open. I take a step back, stumbling a bit off the stairs. Hello? Sean calls out, pushing the door open with his flashlight. His friends shine their flashlights through the doorway, revealing a small entryway that leads to a dining room. It's full of dust and cobwebs, but otherwise looks like a normal room. Sean takes a step forward and immediately disappears. What the fuck? Where did he go? Should we go in after him? I move back up the stairs onto the porch and shine my light around inside. There's no trace of Sean. I don't think we have a choice, Chris says. I suddenly feel a strong sense of foreboding and wonder if Chris feels it too. He looks nervous. I notice that he's standing with his back to the house. His flashlight is pointed at his feet, which means he doesn't see the dark shape moving around the house. It's heading for the front door. I stand there for a second trying to process what I'm seeing. I try aiming my flashlight at it to see what it is, but someone yelling behind me distracts me. Shut the door! Shut the fucking door! I turn around and see my aunt running down the overgrown driveway. Watch out! My aunt points in our direction and I turn around just in time to see Chris get violently pulled into the house, disappearing the moment he crosses through the front frame. My aunt barrels up the stairs and grabs my hand. Do not let go of me until I say so. All I have time to do is grip her hand in my own as she enters the house long enough to grab the door handle. She throws herself out of the house, the door slamming behind her. She brought me back to my parents' house, not letting go of my hand until I was shoved inside the house. I turned around, wondering why my aunt shoved me. My aunt was cloaked in black smoke. I need you to shut up and listen. I don't have much time before I must return to the house. I thought if I didn't step inside, I would be safe. But that didn't work. The house is going to change now. Don't believe anything you hear or see inside the house. Don't let anyone in or out of the house. Everyone else is going to forget. You need to make sure you remember everything that happened tonight. You won't be able to tell anyone about what happened tonight, because after tonight, none of this will have ever happened. She turns and runs down the driveway. I trail off. She's gone. After that night, I volunteered to take more shifts watching the house. My family didn't seem to have an issue with it, nor did they have any memory of that night or my aunt. After a few months, my parents were comfortable enough to start planning a vacation. It's been 4 months. Tonight I noticed someone was peeking out at me from behind a curtain. As soon as I looked at them, they disappeared. I turn and hightail it back to my parents' driveway. Swipe. It had been a long day, a 10-hour shift. My body was aching and I needed something to zone out to for a little while. So I hopped on my phone and started watching videos. Swipe. An ad for an obviously fake video game. Swipe. A woman screaming profanities at the camera while a smoke alarm beeping incessantly. Swipe ad. Swipe. Viral dance video. I rolled my eyes. The algorithm was all over the place tonight. Swipe. A live video. A man and a woman sat at a small round table enjoying a secluded romantic dinner. They were engaged in conversation, seemingly enjoying each other's company. Why would somebody be filming a date? That's oddly invasive and unromantic. Whatever. I kept watching absent-mindedly as I lay in bed, slightly dozing. The sensation of falling awoke me as I jolted fully awake. I glanced at my screen to see the couple still sitting and chatting, but the tone had changed. The woman's shoulders slumped slightly, and she was giving guarded looks to the man sat across from her. And I could see why. What used to be average looking upper class man had shifted. He was taller, his hair went from a light auburn to a smoky cinnamon, his jaw defined, and his cheekbones sharpened more than humanly possible. Is this a speed dating thing? I immediately thought. Then I realized the men were wearing the same exact suit with the same exact accessories. My attention was rapt now. This wasn't your average live, and then they looked directly into the camera. A panicked look in their eyes. Something was definitely off. Suddenly, a message from an unknown user appeared on the top of my screen. I know you're watching, it began. I tapped on it immediately, fear burning in my chest. I know you're watching. Please. I don't know this man. I don't know where my date went. I'm scared. I looked back at the screen and see the woman sitting alone, typing fiercely into the phone, hurriedly putting it away and sitting awkwardly still as she came back into view. He sat down and stared at her, a small grin creasing his face. I looked on in horror as her shoulders began to droop, and her eyes looked like they had trouble opening and closing. He's drugged her, I shouted to my empty apartment. I went to hit the report button, but then it would automatically close the live. Morbid curiosity took over. I need to know how this ends. Once she's fully asleep, the man walks over to her and taps her on her shoulder. She doesn't move. He gestures to someone off screen. Two men come into view who pick her up from the table and carry her away. The man that straightened his suit walked towards the camera, his eyes burning holes through the camera lens. Horror gripped me as I realized his entire body was shifting. It was as if he was scrolling through different characters, the smile on his face growing larger by the second. With one last step, he crouched down until his face was in full view. Still flipping through faces, the smile dropped from them and a serious look appeared. He raised his fingers and shushed me. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.